The lawyer's office smelled of stale coffee and desperation. I'd always hated that scent, a reminder of deals made in hushed tones, of futures bartered for immediate, hollow gains. My own hands felt clammy against the worn leather of the armchair. I tried to focus on the chipped veneer of the mahogany desk, on the dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon light filtering through the grimy window. Anything but the words the lawyer was saying, and as per the last will and testament of my grandmother, Elara Vance, I am now the sole inheritor of Blackwood Manor and all its contents. Blackwood Manor. The name itself was a phantom limb, an ache I'd long tried to numb. My grandmother. I hadn't seen her in 20 years, not since the incident. The incident that had burrowed under my skin and festered, shaping me into the person I was now, a man who painted canvases splashed with shadows, a man who slept with the lights on. The lawyer, a man with thinning hair and eyes that seemed to have seen too much, slid a thick envelope across the desk. "The keys are inside, Mr. Dean, along with a comprehensive inventory of the property. It's extensive." I took the envelope. It felt heavy, not just with paper, but with an unseen weight. My fingers traced the embossed crest on the flap, a raven with a single, unblinking eye, Elara's crest. She'd always been fond of the macabre. Are there any immediate concerns I should be aware of? I managed, my voice rougher than I intended. The lawyer cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. "The property has been vacant for some time. Maintenance is a concern, and some of the older structures, particularly the outbuildings, may require careful inspection." He paused, his gaze lingering on my face. My grandmother was a private woman. She kept to herself. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Private. That was one word for it. Elara Vance had been a keeper of secrets, a curator of the unsettling, and I, by some cruel twist of fate, was now the custodian of her legacy. The drive to Blackwood Manor was a blur of grey skies and churning anxiety. The air grew heavier, thicker, as I turned onto the winding, overgrown lane. The trees, ancient and gnarled, clawed at the sky, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to grasp me. And then, through a curtain of weeping willows, it appeared. Blackwood Manor. It wasn't just decaying, it was actively resisting oblivion. The once grand façade was peeling, the stones stained with damp and time. A single turret, listing precariously, seemed to mark the very concept of architectural stability. It was a monument to neglect, a mausoleum of memories I'd tried so hard to bury. Parking the car felt like an act of defiance, something faintly metallic, like old blood. The key, a large, ornate piece of iron, turned with a groan in the massive front door. The sound echoed through the cavernous foyer, a mournful lament. My flashlight beam cut a hesitant swat through the gloom, illuminating dust sheets draped over furniture like shrouds. Cobwebs, thick as cotton candy, clung to the ornate chandelier, catching the light and shimmering like spectral webs. I walked deeper into the house, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the creaking floorboards. Each room was a tableau of arrested decay, a snapshot of a life abruptly halted. Grandfather clocks stood silent, their pendulums frozen mid-swing. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched my progress, their painted eyes seeming to follow me. The silence was a palpable entity, pressing in on me, broken only by the occasional groan of the house settling. The distant, rhythmic drip, drip, drip. I found myself drawn to the back of the house, to a narrow door tucked away behind a faded tapestry depicting a hunting scene. The door was plain, utilitarian, a stark contrast to the ornate decor of the manor. It was labeled simply, Service Corridor. The air here was cooler, damper, and the metallic scent was stronger. The dripping sound was more pronounced now, a relentless metronome counting down to something I couldn't yet fathom. The walls were lined with a labyrinth of pipes, some sweating condensation, others coated in a fine layer of rust. The dripping was louder here, a constant, maddening percussion. Each drop seemed to land with a sharp, percussive force, echoing off the metal and stone. The space was cramped, the pipes snaking low overhead, forcing me to stoop. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and stagnant water. I hesitated, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Why was this space so maintained? Or rather, why did it feel so deliberately hidden? And what was that other smell beneath the damp and rust? A faint, sweetish decay, like forgotten flowers left too long in a sealed room. The air in the service corridor was thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like old pennies left to rust. My breath hitched. The label, service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras, felt less like a directive and more like a warning. The pipes snaked along the ceiling, fat and black, weeping condensation that traced greasy trails down the peeling wallpaper. Each drip echoed, a percussive beat against the oppressive silence of the house. It wasn't just a sound, it was a pulse, slow and deliberate, like a dying heart. I ran my hand along the rough, unpainted wood of the wall. It was cold, clammy. My fingers came away slick with a fine layer of grime. I was an artist, accustomed to textures, to the feel of things, but this was a texture of decay. It clung to me, a tangible manifestation of the neglect that had settled over Blackwood Manor like a shroud. I'd inherited this place, this tomb, from a woman I barely knew, a ghost in my own family history. And now, here I was, stepping further into its decaying embrace, driven by a morbid curiosity that felt like a sickness. I could see no end to it, only a gradual fading of what little light managed to seep in from the hallway behind me. My footsteps, when I finally dared to take them, were unnervingly loud on the bare floorboards. Each creak seemed to announce my intrusion, a violation of the house's slumber. I told myself I was being foolish, letting the atmosphere get to me. This was just an old house, neglected, forgotten, nothing more. But the hairs on the back of my neck prickled, a constant, low-grade hum of unease. I paused, listening. The dripping was the only constant, but beneath it, or perhaps woven into it, was a faint, almost imperceptible sound, a rustling, like paper being shuffled or perhaps fabric being drawn across a rough surface. It was too subtle to be sure, lost in the symphony of decay. I strained my ears, trying to isolate it, to pinpoint its source. Was it the wind, the old timbers settling, or was it something else, something the house held within its walls? My eyes, adjusting to the gloom, began to pick out details. Cobwebs, thick as carton batting, draped themselves over unseen objects. Dust lay in undisturbed drifts, a testament to years, perhaps decades of absence. A small wooden crate, its lid askew. It looked out of place, too sturdy, too deliberate in its placement to be mere debris. My heart gave a peculiar lurch, a tremor not of fear, but of something akin to recognition. I approached it cautiously, my boots scuffing softly against the floor. It felt smooth beneath my fingertips, surprisingly so, as if it had been handled, polished. I knelt down, my knees cracking in the stillness. Inside the crate, nestled amongst brittle, yellowed straw, was a collection of old photographs. They were sepia-toned, the faces blurred with time, but undeniably human. A stern-looking woman, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, stared out from one. My grandmother, it was hard to say. Another showed a group of children, their expressions solemn, playing in a sun-dappled garden. They looked like ghosts from another era. As I sifted through them, my fingers brushed against something hard and smooth, buried deeper in the straw. I pulled it out. It was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, its wings folded neatly against its body. It was beautiful, unsettlingly so. I turned it over in my palm, the wood cool and polished against my skin. It felt familiar, a phantom memory tugging at the edges of my consciousness. Then I heard it again. That faint rustling. It was closer this time, distinct. It was a soft, scraping sound, like something being dragged. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The photographs, the bird, they all seemed to fade in importance. My attention was wholly consumed by that sound, by the absolute stillness that followed it. I stood up, my legs stiff, my muscles tensed. I looked down the corridor into the impenetrable black. Was I truly alone in this house? The question hung in the air, unanswered, heavy with unspoken possibilities. The metallic tang in the air intensified as I edged further into the service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras. Each step crunched on a thin layer of grit that coated the concrete floor. My flashlight beam, a trembling cone of light, danced over a chaotic landscape of exposed pipes. They wept a steady, rhythmic drip, drip, drip into unseen puddles, the sound echoing unnervingly in the confined space. It was a constant, insistent pulse, like a weak heartbeat refusing to cease. The dampness clung to my skin, a clammy shroud that made my clothes feel heavy. I ran my fingers along the cold, rough concrete wall. It felt slick in places, as if something had been scraped against it repeatedly. A shiver, unrelated to the chill, traced a path down my spine. This was the underbelly of the house, the forgotten arteries where decay festered. My grandmother had always kept her secrets well guarded, and I suspected this was where she'd kept her most unsettling ones. My grandmother. The thought brought a fresh wave of unease. Her will, however, had been brutally clear. I was to inherit everything. The sprawling, decaying mansion, its contents and all its history. I tried to resist, to sever the last vestiges of connection, but the lawyer's insistent calls, the legal obligations, had worn me down. And now, here I was, in the bowels of her former domain, searching for what? Answers, closure. I wasn't even sure anymore. My flashlight beam caught a glint of something metallic. A toolbox, old and dented, sat half-hidden behind a thick bundle of pipes. Curiosity, a dangerous companion in places like this, tugged at me. I knelt, the grit pressing into my knees through the thin fabric of my jeans. The latch was stiff, protesting with a groan as I forced it open. Inside, nestled amongst rusted wrenches and brittle electrical tape, was a small, leather-bound diary. Its cover was scuffed, the embossed title almost entirely worn away. I hesitated. This felt like a transgression, a violation of a privacy I'd never been privy to, even when he was alive. But the air in here was thick with unspoken things, and the diary felt like a key. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The leather was dry and cracked, smelling faintly of dust and something like lavender, a scent that was strangely out of place in this damp, metallic-smelling corridor. The first few pages were filled with a spidery, elegant script, detailing mundane household accounts and observations about the weather. Then the tone shifted. The entries became shorter, more frantic. Words like disobedience, punishment, and correction began to appear, underscored with a fierce intensity. My breath grew shallow. The drip, drip, drip of the pipe seemed to accelerate, each drop a tiny hammer blow against my nerves. It spoke of a new acquisition, a delicate little thing that needed proper guidance. The handwriting here was almost illegible, jagged and sharp, and then a name. Leela. My stomach twisted. I tried to push the memory away, to focus on the damp concrete, the dripping pipes, but it was no use. I flipped further, my hands shaking. The entries grew increasingly disturbing, filled with descriptions of lessons learned and disciplining the wayward. Then, a passage that made me physically recoil. She watches. She learns. She reminds me of what I must never forget. And she must be kept safe, hidden away where her influence cannot be tainted. Hidden away. My gaze swept across the cluttered corridor, the dense network of pipes. Where would someone hide something they deemed precious, yet feared? It was deep, shrouded in an impenetrable gloom that my light struggled to pierce. A faint, almost imperceptible scent wafted from that recess, cutting through the damp earth and metallic tang. It was faint but distinct. Powder. Old, cloying powder, the kind used on porcelain, and something else. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I crawled towards the alcove, the grit scraping against my palms. I pushed aside a dangling length of frayed insulation, and then I saw her. Her painted eyes, a startling, vacant blue, to stare directly at me, unblinking. Her lace dress, once pristine, was now stained and tattered, clinging to her stiff limbs like grave shrouds. Leela, the world tilted. My breath hitched. He was real. What had my grandmother done with her all these years? And why had she kept her hidden in this forgotten place? The air in the service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras, was thick with the smell of rust and something else, something damp and earthy like disturbed soil. My flashlight beam, a shaky white finger, traced the labyrinth of metal. Each drip from the massive, corroded pipes was a tiny hammer blow against the silence, echoing in the confined space. Hidden away. The words my grandmother had whispered, a ghost of a sound from a lifetime ago, still clung to me. I squeezed past a junction of pipes, the cold metal biting through my shirt. The recess I'd seen wasn't deep enough. My breath hitched. This whole house felt like a trick of the light, a decaying façade over something rotten. My grandmother had been eccentric, yes, but she'd also been terrified. I remembered her hushed tones, her wide, darting eyes. She'd always spoken of Leela as if the doll were a living, breathing entity. It was too small for a person, too irregular for a deliberate hiding place. But it was there, a space that felt. Waiting, I knelt, the dampness seeping into my jeans. I reached into the cavity, my fingers brushing against something rough and brittle. It felt like dried leaves or something worse. A faint scraping sound, like fingernails on wood, skittered from the far end of the corridor. I froze, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. The sound stopped. Just the dripping. I told myself it was the house settling, the old pipes groaning under the weight of years. But the sweetness in the air intensified, a sickly perfume that made my stomach churn. I pulled my hand out of the cavity. Nothing, just dust and the detritus of forgotten repairs. Disappointment, sharp and bitter, pricked at me, but it was quickly replaced by a prickle of unease, the scraping sound. It had been too distinct, too deliberate to be the house. I swept the flashlight beam down the corridor again, its beam dancing over the slick, moss-covered concrete. I stood, my knees protesting. The feeling of being watched, a constant companion since I'd arrived, intensified. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a pressure, a tangible weight on my skin. I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, empty. The sweetness was stronger now, almost suffocating. It reminded me of something from my childhood. A forgotten toy box, a nursery that had been sealed off for years. I pushed the memory away, a familiar instinct. Don't look too closely. Don't think about it. I turned back to the cavity. Grandmother had said hidden away. Perhaps not physically hidden, but kept away, out of sight, out of mind. I ran my hand along the rough concrete again. The sweetness seemed to emanate from the wall itself. I tapped it with my knuckle. Then I heard it again. A soft, high-pitched giggle. It was closer this time, seeming to come from just beyond the bend in the corridor. My blood, which had been thrumming with adrenaline, now felt sluggish, heavy. It was the sound of a child, but wrong, warped, like a music box playing at the wrong speed. I backed away from the cavity, my eyes glued to the bend in the corridor. The flashlight beam trembled. This was not the house settling. This was not the pipes. My grandmother's words, so clear in my memory, felt like a fresh wound. He's still here, Dean. I took a step back, then another. The sweet smell was overpowering, making my head swim. The giggle came again, a little louder, a little clearer. My name. I raised the flashlight, my hand shaking so violently the beam juddered. It was no longer just a distant echo. It was a presence. It was Leela. But how could she be here in this forgotten corner of the house when I hadn't even found her yet? The air in the service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras, hung thick and cloying, a miasma of decay and something else, something sickly sweet that scraped at the back of my throat. I could feel it clinging to my skin, a damp film that refused to evaporate. The dripping of water from the unseen pipes was a maddening, irregular metronome, each plink echoing in the narrow space, amplifying the silence between them. It was a silence that felt pregnant, waiting. I'd come down here looking for answers, for a way out of the suffocating grip this house had on me. But instead, I found this. The scent intensified, and I fought the urge to gag. It was the smell of old perfume, of dried flowers left too long in stagnant water, and underneath it, a coppery tang that made my stomach churn. Leela's scent. It had been so long, yet so undeniably hers. Then the giggle. It was no longer a distant echo. It was close, impossibly close. My breath hitched. My hands, which had been clenched into fists at my sides, trembled. I forced myself to unclench them, to smooth the fabric of my shirt, a futile attempt to regain some semblance of control. The damp concrete beneath my worn boots felt slick, treacherous. They wept condensation, fat droplets gathering and falling with agonizing slowness. The name, or was it just the wind, playing tricks in the labyrinthine bowels of this cursed place? But the scent, the giggle, they were too real. I needed light, I needed space, I needed to escape the suffocating weight of that unseen presence. Back in the main house, the dim light filtering through the grimy windows of the studio offered little comfort. The canvases, stacked against the walls, seemed to leer at me, their blank surfaces holding a terrible potential. My hands were still shaking. I had to paint. It was the only way I knew to process, to exercise. But what would come out this time? The house, Leela, they were seeping into me, poisoning my inspiration. I grabbed a fresh canvas, the rough weave of the fabric, a familiar comfort against my fingertips. The smell of turpentine and linseed oil filled my nostrils, a sharp, clean scent that was a welcome antidote to the decay I just experienced. I squeezed tubes of paint onto my palette, stark whites, bruised purples, a deep, unsettling crimson. My usual vibrant palette felt wrong. As my brush touched the canvas, it was as if my hands moved with a will of their own. I wasn't thinking, not in the way I usually did, meticulously planning composition, color theory. It was a raw, visceral outpouring. Jagged lines slashed across the surface, forming distorted figures, their limbs twisted at impassable angles. They were my eyes, I realized with a sickening lurch. The sweet, cloying scent began to fill the studio, weaving itself into the sharp tang of the paints. It was subtle at first, then grew, a phantom perfume that seemed to emanate from the very air around me. My brushstrokes became more frantic, more desperate. The crimson bled into the whites, creating the illusion of wounds, of violation. The purple deepened, pooling like bruises on skin. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through the haze of creation. I flinched, my hand jerking, sending a splatter of black paint across the nascent horror on the canvas. It looked like blood. I stepped back, my chest heaving. It was Leela, but not the doll I remembered. This was something older, something more insidious. The sweet scent was stronger now, almost suffocating. I looked at the painting, at the terrified eyes staring back, and a terrifying question formed in the depths of my mind. Was I painting Leela, or was Leela painting me? The dripping echoed, each splash a tiny hammer blow against the silence. I'd been down here before, a child, exploring the forgotten veins of this house. Then it was an adventure. Now it was a descent. The sickly sweet smell was stronger here, a cloying perfume that made my eyes water. It was the smell of lilies, I realized, but not fresh ones. Old, decaying lilies, their petals gone to mush, their scent soured and heavy. My fingers, slick with the dampness of the concrete wall, traced a path through the grime. I pushed further into the service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras. The air grew colder, a biting chill that had nothing to do with the season. It seeped into my bones, making my teeth chatter. My breath plumed in front of me, ghostly white. The dripping intensified, a frantic, irregular rhythm that felt like a frantic heartbeat, not of this place, but of something trapped within it. I could hear it now, beneath the water's lament, a faint, almost imperceptible scratching. It was coming from behind one of the access panels. My hand trembled as I reached for the rusted metal. The scratching stopped. It was worse than the dripping. It was a pregnant pause, a held breath. I yanked the panel open. Dust motes danced in the weak beam of my flashlight, disturbed by the sudden draft. Inside, nestled amongst a tangle of corroded wires and forgotten tools, was a small wooden box. They looked like twisted vines or perhaps skeletal fingers. My grandmother had always kept secrets, hidden away in the dusty corners of her mind. This felt like one of them. I lifted the box. It was surprisingly heavy. The lid wasn't latched, and as I tilted it, it creaked open, revealing its contents. Layers of brittle, yellowed newspaper, smelling faintly of mildew and something else, something metallic, like old blood. Beneath the paper, nestled in faded velvet, was Leela. He was smaller than I remembered, her porcelain face chipped and cracked, her button eyes dull and vacant. The same faded calico dress, the same stitched smile that never quite reached her eyes. But she felt different. The malevolence I'd always sensed around her was amplified here, a palpable pressure that made my ears ring. It was a physical weight, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I picked her up. It felt like holding a shard of ice that had been left out in the sun too long, its surface slick and clammy. As my fingers brushed against her dress, a faint tremor ran through the doll, or perhaps it was just my own shaking. The scratching started again, this time from within the box, frantic, insistent sound. I dropped Leela back into the box with a clatter. The scratching stopped instantly. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum solo. The newspaper rustled, settling around Leela. I could see something beneath the thin layers now, a small, leather-bound journal. My hands shook as I reached for it. The leather was cracked and peeling, the pages brittle with age. The handwriting inside was my grandmother's, a spidery script I recognized from old letters. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the faded ink. It spoke of rituals, of pacts, of a desperate attempt to appease something ancient and hungry that dwelled within the house. It spoke of Leela, not as a toy, but as a vessel. Leela, the collector, the keeper. My grandmother had found her, or perhaps Leela had found her, years before I was born. The journal detailed her attempts to control Leela, to bind her, to contain her power. But Leela was too strong. Then I found it. A single entry dated the summer I turned 7, the summer of the incident. The words blurred, the ink bleeding into the paper as if the memory itself was weeping. It described a summoning, a desperate, misguided attempt by my grandmother to imbue Leela with a piece of my innocence, to make her a guardian, a protector. Instead, he had unleashed something far more terrible. He had bound a fragment of my deepest fear to the doll. He had given Leela the key to my own undoing. The scratching began again, louder this time. It was no longer just in the barks. It was in the walls, in the pipes, in the very air around me. It was the sound of something clawing its way out. My grandmother's final entry was a single, desperate plea, scrawled in a hand that had lost all control. She remembers everything. I looked down at Leela, her button eyes seeming to gleam in the dim light. The stitched smile felt wider, more predatory. The sweet, decaying scent of lilies filled my nostrils, thick and suffocating. What had my grandmother truly done? And what was Leela waiting for now? The air in the main hall hung heavy, a stagnant breath I couldn't exhale. Leela sat on the ornate banister, a silent sentinel. The lily's cloying perfume was stronger now, clinging to my clothes, my skin. My grandmother's scent, mixed with something else, something ancient and foul. I had to get out, now. I lunged for the front door, my hand reaching for the heavy brass knob. It wouldn't turn. I rattled it, a frantic, desperate sound in the oppressive quiet. Locked. Solidly locked. A cold dread, sharp and precise, began to prickle at my skin. I tried the back door. Same result. The windows, large and paned with age, were equally unyielding, sealed as if by some unseen force. Panic began to bubble, hot and acrid in my throat. This wasn't just a locked house. This felt deliberate. I remembered the way Leela's button eyes had seemed to follow me, the subtle shift in her stitched smile. Was she doing this? The thought was ludicrous, the product of a mind frayed by sleepless nights and the unsettling familiarity of this place. But the evidence was undeniable. I needed to think. My artist's eye, trained to observe detail, scanned the room. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall was unnervingly loud, each beat a hammer blow against my nerves. I needed another way out. The house had service entrances, surely. My grandmother had lived here for decades. There had to be a utility access, a forgotten door. My mind drifted to the blueprints I'd found in her study, a tangle of lines and annotations. There was a section marked service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras. It ran beneath the west wing, connecting to an external maintenance hatch. If I could find that access point, I could escape. I moved through the echoing rooms, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the polished wood floors. The house seemed to resist me. A floorboard groaned behind me, and I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Nothing. It was like the murmur of a crowd just beyond earshot. I found the entrance to the service corridor in the bowels of the house, a narrow, uninviting doorway tucked away behind a tapestry depicting a hunting scene. This was it. The service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras. The words echoed in my mind, a strange mantra. The dripping sound was constant, a maddening rhythm punctuated by the low hum of unseen machinery. Water, thick and black, trickled down the pipes, pooling on the grimy concrete floor. The stench of mold and stagnant water was overpowering, a stark contrast to the cloying sweetness of lilies upstairs. As I moved deeper, the corridor seemed to twist and lengthen. The walls, slick with moisture, felt impossibly close, pressing in on me. The dripping grew louder, more insistent, like 1,000 tiny hammers. I kept my gaze fixed on the path ahead, my breath catching in my chest. I could feel it, a pressure building behind my eyes, a growing sense of disorientation. Then I heard it, a child's giggle. It was faint at first, then louder, clearer, echoing through the damp air. It was a sound I knew, a sound I had tried to bury for years. My own childish laughter. But it was wrong, twisted. I stopped, my body rigid. The sound seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. I scanned the narrow space, my eyes darting between the dripping pipes and the grimy walls. There was nothing. The corridor ahead seemed to blur, the flickering lights distorting the space. The walls appeared to ripple like water. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, but the illusion persisted. The dripping sound intensified, morphing into a frantic, irregular drumming. It sounded like fingernails on metal. I stumbled forward, my hands outstretched, needing to feel the solid reality of the wall. My fingers brushed against something soft, yielding, not concrete. I recoiled, a choked gasp escaping my lips. I shone my small flashlight, the beam trembling. It illuminated a section of the wall that wasn't wall at all. It was a thick, matted weave of hair, black, coarse hair, woven together like some grotesque tapestry, and in the center of it, a single, wide, stitched smile. Leela's smile. The giggle echoed again, closer this time, right beside my ear. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. But the air was thick with the scent of lilies, overpowering the stench of decay. It was as if the entire service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras, had been transformed into the doll's private domain. I tried to move, to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot, stuck in the thick, black water on the floor. The corridor ahead seemed to stretch into an impassable, infinite blackness. Was there even an exit anymore? Or had I walked willingly into the doll's embrace? I had to get out. But my feet felt rooted to the warped parquet, each step a Herculean effort. The doll's painted eyes, chipped and faded, followed my every flicker of movement. They held a glint of something I'd seen before, a cruel amusement that curdled my stomach. I turned, not towards the grand front doors, but towards the shadowed more of the service corridor. It was a place I'd avoided, a labyrinth of forgotten passages and the house's grimy innards. The air grew colder as I entered, the sweet perfume of lilies replaced by the metallic tang of rust and the damp, earthy smell of decay. There were no cameras down here, no watchful eyes, but I felt observed nonetheless. The very walls seemed to press in, slick with condensation, the rough plaster scraping against my fingertips as I stumbled along. My flashlight beam, a weak, wavering circle, danced over a tangle of pipes, their surfaces weeping rust. The noise intensified, a chorus of drips and groans from the house's ancient plumbing. My grandmother's careful, spidery script detailed the doll's arrival, its unsettling presence, and the insidious way it had woven itself into the fabric of her life, and now mine. It had mentioned a name, whispered in the margins, a name I dismissed as a childish fantasy. A faint scratching sound, impassably close, froze me. I swung the flashlight beam wildly, the light catching only the glistening pipes and the slick, grimy floor. Nothing. Yet the sound persisted, a tiny, insistent rasp, like fingernails on wood. My breath hitched. It was coming from behind me, from the direction of the main hall. Slowly, deliberately, I turned. And there, at the end of the corridor, a sliver of light from the hall illuminated Leela. He was no longer on the banister. She stood at the threshold of the service corridor, her small porcelain face tilted upwards, those vacant blue eyes fixed on me. How? I had left her there. I was certain. The lily's perfume, impassably, was back, stronger than ever, a suffocating wave that threatened to drown me. I backed away, my heel catching on a loose floor tile. Only the faint, spectral glow from the hall where Leela stood offered any illumination. It wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too alive. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I fumbled for the flashlight, my fingers slick with sweat. It slithered into my ears, winding its way into my thoughts. You can't leave, Dean. We're family. My grandmother's journal, the name, the ritual. It wasn't just about appeasement. It was about sacrifice, about binding something to the house, to the lineage, and Leela was the key. I remembered a passage, a desperate plea for release, for an end to the cycle. It required a confrontation, a severing. Leela was closer now, a mere 10 feet away. Her dress, once pristine white, was stained and tattered, its lace trim frayed. Yet her gaze was unwavering. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the cloying scent of lilies burning my nostrils. The knowledge, hard-won and terrifying, settled in my gut. This was it. There was no escape, no running, only facing it. My trembling hand tightened around the flashlight, the cool metal a small anchor in the rising tide of my fear. The doll took another step, its tiny porcelain feet making no sound on the damp concrete. Leela's head tilted, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. The rough texture scraped my skin, a welcome, grounding pain. My gaze was locked on the doll. It was advancing, its movements jerky, unnatural, like a marionette whose strings were being pulled by an unseen, malevolent puppeteer. I could feel its presence, a palpable weight pressing down on me, stealing my breath, my will. But the journal, the ritual, it wasn't just about her power. It was about my connection to it, and if I could sever that, I took another step, not backwards but forwards. A single, faltering step. The doll paused. Its head snapped up, its loose eye swinging wildly. The dripping pipes seemed to fall silent, the sudden absence of their rhythm more terrifying than their constant drone. There was this truly the only way, to stand my ground. The hiss cut through the sudden, heavy quiet. It was a sound that scraped against my teeth, a wet, ragged thing born from something ancient and starved. My breath hitched, a raw, ragged sound in my own ears. The doll, Leela, stood at the end of the service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras. Her painted smile seemed wider now, a rictus of glee. The loose eye, the one that always unnerved me, swiveled, fixing on me with a malevolent, unblinking stare. I gripped the heavy brass candlestick tighter, my grip tight. It felt absurdly light, a child's toy against the crushing weight of what was happening. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something cloying and sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot. It clung to the back of my throat, making me gag. My own fear was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, a familiar companion I'd hoped to leave behind. But Leela had brought it back, amplified, twisted. She took a step. Not a child's step, but a slow, deliberate drag, her worn fabric shoes shuffling on the grimy concrete floor. The sound was a whisper of decay. Another step, and another. The rhythmic drip of water from the unseen pipes above was the only other sound, a marking metronome to my unraveling sanity. Each drip was a tiny hammer blow against my nerves. I thought of the childhood drawings, the ones tucked away in the attic, filled with scribbled figures and distorted faces. I'd always assumed they were just the product of a frightened child's imagination. Now, looking at Leela, at the way her porcelain skin seemed to pulse with an inner, sickly light, I wasn't so sure. There was this always here waiting. Had it been feeding on my fear for all these years? My legs felt like lead. Turning and running seemed like the only sensible option, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The locked trunk in the attic, the one I'd finally forced open. Inside, not just old clothes, but a brittle, yellow journal. My grandmother's journal. The entries had been cryptic at first, then increasingly desperate. She wrote of a presence that had attached itself to the doll, a hungry thing that fed on innocence and fear. She tried to contain it, to starve it, but it had only grown stronger, weaving itself into the very fabric of the house, into the minds of those who lived within its walls. And then, a specific entry, scrawled in a shaky hand. It craves release. It craves a vessel. Leela was closer now. I could see the fine cracks spiderwebbing across her cheek, like tiny veins. Her glass eyes, one fixed, the other rolling, seemed to bore into my soul. The hiss had intensified, a dry, rasping sound that promised unspeakable things. My own heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My palms were slick with sweat, the candlestick almost slipping from my grasp. The offering must be made, but not by me, not again. What offering? What cycle? Leela stopped, only a few feet away. The temperature plummeted further. A breath plumed in front of me. The smell of decay intensified, sickeningly sweet. She tilted her head, a small, almost inquisitive gesture, but the intent behind it was pure malice. Then she spoke. I brought me back, Dean. I opened the door. I flinched, the candlestick clattering against the concrete. The sound was deafening in the stillness. I stumbled back, my heel catching on an uneven patch of floor. The rough texture grated against my skin. Leela didn't move. She simply watched me, her painted smile a cruel mockery. I am the artist, Dean. I create. I understand sacrifice. Sacrifice. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I looked at my hands, shaking violently. My art, my paintings, wrong. Had I been painting it? Had my fear, my trauma been the fuel for my success? Leela's head lolled to the side. The loose eye seemed to fix on the candlestick, then on my hands. I have the blood. I have the talent. I can finish what I started. Asterisk, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't let this thing win. I wouldn't be its pawn. Scrambling to my feet, ignoring the searing pain in my knee, I lunged. Not at Leela, but at the wall beside her. I slammed the heavy candlestick against the corroded metal of a large, protruding pipe. The clang was deafening. A shower of rust flakes rained down. I swung again and again, a frenzy of desperation. The pipe groaned, then shrieked, a tortured metal scream. It sprayed over Leela, soaking her worn dress, plastering her hair to her porcelain face. She recoiled, a strangled gasp escaping her. Leela, drenched and dripping, seemed to shrink, her painted smile fading, her movements becoming jerky, unnatural. Leela, caught in the torrent, was swept off her feet, her porcelain form tumbling through the murky water, disappearing around a bend in the corridor. I stood there, gasping for breath, the candlestick heavy in my hand. The immediate threat was gone. Leela was gone. It was heavy, expectant. The smell of decay still lingered, a phantom scent. I had survived. But as I looked at my waterlogged hands, at the rust and grime clinging to my skin, I knew that a part of me had been irrevocably stained. Had I truly broken the cycle, or merely delayed the inevitable?